Hello and welcome to Mark Codex. My name is Mark, and today we will be talking about a function in JavaScript called reduce. Now, reduce, from its name, reduces the array to a single value. Also, it is one of the higher order functions. What is a higher order function? Well, simply put, a higher order functions are functions that return a function when executed, or takes a function as one or more of its argument, or actually both. In my video today, I will break down reduce and its parameters, how reduce work, and give 5 examples to where we can use reduce. As usual, timestamps will be in the description box below in case you want to skip to any part of the video. And now, let's get to it. Okay, so let's look at our example right here. We have an array of characters, and what we want to do, we want to use the reduce for this array to actually concatenate all these letters to give us an output of a single word, which is reduce right here. So if I run this function, or basically the whole code, if I run it, we'll see that reduce converted from an array into a single word or a single string. And that's awesome. That's what reduce is for, is to give us an output of a single value. Now, what are the parameters that reduce takes, or arguments? So it takes an accumulator. The accumulator is the return value from the callback. And what that means is basically each time the iteration happens, whatever your callback will be, this accumulator will be. So what I mean by that is basically, let's actually console it. So let's do, every time I want to learn something, I just console it. So I'm just going to console the accumulator. And you can see right here, at first it started as R, and then RE, read, redo, reduce, and reduce. That's what an accumulator is the return value each time the iteration happened. What is the current value? Let's check it out. So the current value is basically when the iteration happens, it's that character at that moment. So let's see. So if I save, we'll see EDUCE. Now, you'll say, like, where is the R? Well, the R, it was like the initial value for the accumulator, so it passes over to start at the second index. So, or the first index in this element. So that's the current value at that moment. Now, the current index, from its name, it's going to be that current index. Now, because we passed over the initial value, the current index, it will start at 1, not at 0. So if we can look at, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It didn't start from 0 because of the accumulator. And the last one is the array itself. So if I console it, it will return each time, each iteration, it will return the same array. There might be a lot of purposes for those. I never had to use this array or that parameter before. I use the index. I, of course, use the accumulator and the current value. But I never use this one. So if you do use this one, please let me know in the comments below. And that's basically it. That's a simple example with all the arguments inside the reduce function. Okay, so now let's see why this didn't happen. Like, why the index was not at 0. Well, basically, also reduce. Technically, you have to actually give it an initial value. And I will tell you why there isn't. There's a lot of people who will say, like, no, you don't need to. And definitely that's true. But for me, I would say, like, for reduce, at least, you got to give it an initial value. And as you can see here, it actually, like VS Code is telling us, if it, you got to give it like an initial value. Initial value, it should be a string. I usually give it like an empty string for this matter. And why? Because basically, think about this way. Initial value is, it will be whatever the false value of the expected output. So what I mean by that, if your output is a string, you will put like an empty string. If your output is expected to be an object, it will be an object. oops, it will be an empty object. If your output you're expecting to be an array, it will be an array. So you will give any false value for the expected output. And here's why. If you give reduce an empty array, what will happen is you will get an error if you didn't initialize the initial value. So I'll run this and we will see. We get a type error because you just used reduce on an empty array. But if I initialize an initial or give an initial value to this function, now we won't have an error. It will give us an empty string. And that's why I like to add an initial value. Okay, so now after we breaking down every single aspect or every single element inside the reduce function, now let's see the kind of like order of execution of each console, or like how the whole reduce function is actually working. For me, like when I actually learn code, I do love seeing how an actual function running step by step. For this example, I'm going to demonstrate what are each time the reduce function iterate, we'll have an output for each accumulator, current value, current index, the array itself, and the returned value. For both cases, the first one would be without an initialized value, the other one would be for an initial value. This is very, very important because you will see what is the difference between the two. So for example, if we actually console log every single step or every single argument plus the output or the returned value right here, and as you can see, like I'm putting the console log for this value before the return, because if you well, obviously if you put it after the return, it's not going to work, or if you put it in the return will not return a value, it will return just the console. Either way, so let's run this. And as we see here, accumulator starts with an R because we didn't have an initial value. So it takes this as the initial value. And E is the current value. And as you notice, current index start at 1. And that's really, really big. So if I show you in, for example, like Google Sheets right here, we could look at the iteration like more clearly. So the first call, the accumulator will be R, current value will be E, as we saw, and the current index will be 1. The array will stay the same, and return value will be RE. And then the second call, which is the second iteration, will be RE. The current value will be D, because that's what is the current value at right now. And the index of D is 2, the same array, and the return value would be RED, because the return value is the basically concatenation of those two cells right here, the RE and the D, and so on and so forth. If you look at the current index, it will start at 1 and then ends with 5. So we have only 5 calls. However, if we go back to our code, and this time we will initialize. So if we can see right here, accumulator will start at 0. So with the initial value, we will, if we add an initial value, we add another element to basically reduce, and we increase the calls. So before we had in the no initial value, we had 5, but now we have 6. And as you can see, in the accumulator, we'll start at nothing. This is basically an empty string because that's our initial value, and the current value will be R. So if you can imagine it, if you add an initial value, all right, you just added the step to the whole reduce function. But if no initial value, you just basically remove that. And that's what is the difference between the two. So after we broke down the reduce function and we broke down every single step of that reduce function, I hope now reduce is kind of clear. That's like my whole purpose, explaining this and break it down to its like really, really small details, because it's very important. I remember like when I learned reduce, I couldn't even find any tutorial that actually explained it that way, like really break it into a part. So For me, like writing the reduce function, it was kind of like a second nature for me. It's just like I know it does this, but I don't understand like the steps. Doing this kind of like helped me to see what is happening behind the scenes inside the reduce itself. So hopefully that kind of like will benefit you from learning how reduce works. Now let's get into seeing some example of reduce. We actually gonna do a sum example, the first one. So reduce could actually help us sum an array of numbers. This is going to change the concatenation part to sum, just to make kind of like make sense to have that. And I'll delete all these console logs. I'm not going to need the current index for this moment or the array itself. So I'm just going to keep accumulator and current value. And also kind of like usually I like to write those as A and B just to simplify the whole function and just to give you like a more clear view onto what is going on. So now because it is a number, my initial value should be 0. Again, I don't have to give it. In both ways, it will give me the same answer, but you saw why we added the initial and we removed it. So if I run this function, it says example array. Oh, the name, the variable is different, so we got an error. So if we save that, now we got the don't worry about this, is basically node is acting weird on me. So let's do that. So now we can see sum is actually 10. If we have this as 10, the summation of all these is 10, and I added the initial value as 15, I'll have a result of 25. This focus, like, think about it this way. This function right now with the 15, it's similar to, if I remove this 15 and put this 15 right here. Those kind of like those both examples are kind of the same. So for this one, the result will be 25. So if I save it, we'll see it's 25, and I added 15 here. Well, what do you know? It's 25. So that's like, what is the difference if you add an actual true value or a truthy value as an initial value, not a 0. If you added a 0, it will not change anything, but just to protect you from having a type error if you had an empty array. Now for another example. The second example will be if we're going to have an array that contains other arrays inside of it and you just want to flatten it out. And in order to do that, let's first see how the array would look like as an example. So this is like as a flattened array, and that's what it is. It's basically arrays inside the main array. What we want to do, as an output, we just wanted to have this array looks like something like this: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. In order to do that, of course, obviously we're going to use reduce, and we kind of like going to do something small different in here. So instead of well, first of all, let's change the variable name just to give it like a more relatable name. Let's call this flattened. So we changed the name for that, and also we changed the array name. Now to return this, what we're going to do, we're going to use concatenation method, and concatenation method, well, basically it's a function that concatenate two elements together. What will happen is basically this will change this array from that to flatten it out to look something like that. So let's save and run that. Oh, we have an error. Oh, I see. So basically this is what happened. So because I initialized the 0, as I said before in this video, if you, whatever the output that you're looking at in the callback function, it has to match the initial value. So because the concatenation only change the output to an array, initial value will have an error because it is a number and an integer to be exact. So I have to change this to fix this error. I have to change it to an array. So let's save that, and there we go. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this doesn't like it doesn't have to be like an array of 2 elements. It could be like maybe like 4. And if I save that, boom, you get like one single array that actually flattened out without even any arrays inside of it. Now to example 3. So we checked like how to flatten an array, how to sum an array. There's another way, or another thing that we could use reduce with, is that we could definitely kind of calculate or count how many duplicates we have in our array. So for example, let's copy an example array of letters. Again, we're going to do something different inside our returning. And what we're going to do, we're going to grab letters first. And we're going to change this array to letters. And we're going to change flatten to something called, let's call it counted letters. Pause the video, and I want you to try to solve this. So what we need to do is basically, as I said, like we're going to do something different. So first of all, we need to check if that first element or whatever the current value that we are at in the array is in the accumulator, which is the empty object for this moment. What we will do, if that happens, if it existed, we will just add A with the index B to be incremented by 1. Let's explain it like that. So if the accumulator has the letter A in there, and the initial or the actual value or the current value is A, we will basically have that at the index and incremented by 1. So will be 2. So that basically what I'm doing. Now in the else section, of course, like if there is no letter, I will do the same thing. A index B will equal to 1. And that's it. That will fix whatever I have. Whenever I have duplicates, it will be taken care of here. And if I don't have any duplicates, it will just initialize that key to 1. And then I will just return A. And what do you know? I have A is iterated or just found 1 time, B is twice, D is twice, it has duplicates, and K is 1. And that's the solution to example 3. Great. Another way to use reduce for our example right here, we're gonna use we could use reduce to group by. What do I mean by that? Well, if we have an array of objects like that, and this array is a movies array. Each array will have a movie name and a genre, and what I want to do, I want to actually group by the genre. How to do that? Well, first of all, we need to create a function to solve this method. Inside that function, we're going to use reduce, and here we will see how we will use reduce. So bear with me, I'm just going to write it down and then I'll explain it. Pause. So we're gonna create a method that will take care of a method that will take two pause 1 2 1 2, a method that will take 2 arguments. The first one, the array itself, so we can say an object array, and the property to group by. If I can spell. And after that, so let's do the fancy arrow function. And inside that, we're going to use our reduce function. Let me clean up a little bit right here. We could delete this console log. And there we go. So now what we want to do is to, instead of doing that, we just want to return immediately. So we could return. What we can return is the object array. So the object array, the array that I'm going to pass to reduce, and it will take A and B. I'll just delete from this previous example. I'll delete that. Keep the return A because I'll return that. So let me show you what the output is going to look like. Give me 1 second to write it down and I will be back. Whew, that took a while. So this is my output. What I'm looking for is basically to have an object, and the key will be my genre, and that key will contain an array of objects of the movie. Great. So I'm gonna create a key that simply will assign this key to the key that we just passed in through the array. So let's see. So we're gonna do if or let key equals. We're gonna grab the current value and we're gonna have that property passed in. So what I'm doing is simply checking the key or assigning the value of that property to this key. So the first iteration will be, the first property is going to be a comedy. So key will be, the genre. So the property is genre. And I will take that and I will check if, oops, I'm yelling at it. If simply, if there is in the accumulator doesn't contain that key, what I will do is to assign that key to an empty array. If that does exist, what I'm going to do is just to push that push, and I'll push just the current value, and then I'll return A. So I will go over it once I finish the solution in this one. So let's see what else left. We need to actually try to create a group movies, and then we're gonna say equal by, and then now we're gonna use our function that we just created. What do we want to group by? We're gonna group by. We're gonna pass in the movies list or the array, and then I'm gonna group by genre. And now I'm gonna just console log group by. Or sorry, group movies. Bear with me. Nice. So let's look at it. So we have comedy, and comedy is the movie Tropic Thunder. Action will be Extraction and Suicide Squad. Romance is Casablanca, and that's how you group by an action. So let's go over it pretty quick. I know it's kind of like probably it's going to get confusing, but it is super simple. What I'm doing, the property that I passed in here in this function is the genre, right? So the current object that I'm receiving is one of those. And what I'm just creating, I'm creating key of that object of that genre. So I'm just saying that the key of that genre of that element will be what? So the first iteration will be comedy. Now, I'm checking the first accumulator if it does have the key or not. So if it does not have that key, which is comedy, just assign it to an empty array. If it does have it, just push the whole object in there. And that's where the push worked in the action. That's why I could push the first one and then push the second one. That's about it. Let's move on to the last example. Great, we did the group by method. Now last is actually last. I was about to say last but not least, but it is last. So unfortunately, stop crying. It's okay. So the other way that we could use reduce with is basically to remove duplicates. We found like how to find duplicates. We sum an array of numbers. We actually group by, but another usage is simply to remove duplicates. What I'm looking at is this array, the letters array. And what I want to do, I just wanted to remove duplicates and just keep it as a single letter. So anything that gets duplicated will have it as a single letter. So what I will do, I don't need the group by method, and the return, I will just create remove duplicates that equals to letters array reduced, and I'll remove all those. I will still return the accumulator, but this time I need to return back an array that has all the unique values. I can remove this line, and I need to console log remove duplicates. Okay, what do we want to do here? Well, basically we just want to remove the duplicates. So we will check if the accumulator if a dot index of existed on the current value, or the b. I was about to write current value. So b is the current value. If the current value is existed in a, the accumulator, which at the moment is an empty array, and I will say is equal to -1, which means that doesn't exist. I will just simply push the current value to my array. Anything else, I'll just return a. First value, it's an empty array, and then it will pass in a inside, but then it will check b. Does this array? Let's comment this out. The array, which is the accumulator at this moment, does it have the letter b? If not, I will push that letter. Does a, and then it will become like a, and then b. The second iteration, or the third iteration, it will check with a. So my accumulator is AB. Does the letter A consist or is inside the accumulator? Yes, it is. It's index 0. So we will just pass over this, and we will return an array, and so on and so forth. So let's save this, and there we go. We just removed all the duplicates from this array. And see, simply with just few lines, that's what I love Reduce. What I love about Reduce is basically with just simple lines, we just solved a lot of problems in web development, in languages, in software engineering, whatever you want to call it. We solved the problem, and that basically will help us next time if we face the same issues, or we want to have to do these kind of things. We could use Reduce in there. Please write in the comments below if you have any other examples, and that would be lovely, so we could probably talk about it in another video. And that is it. Thank you so much, guys, for sticking with me through the whole video, and I hope you find it useful than boring. Please subscribe and share this video to help me out making more content. And until the next time, stay curious.